Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the future of the water and wastewater industry and the careers you didn't know about. And I'm your host, Dave Kosminski, and we are live here in our studio with a special guest, a good friend of mine who is actually the Director of Health for the Chatham Health District, Russ Melmed. So, hi, Russ, how are you?
Good, Dave. How are you?
Good. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. And I know from the water industry standpoint, you guys are, I think, probably more dealing with the sanitarian side, but tell us how your agency deals with more of the private side of the water and wells and so forth.
Yeah, sure. Well, much of Connecticut doesn't have public water.
Yeah.
Most of the people in Connecticut, or most of the geography, most of the space in Connecticut is not served by public water systems. Mm-hmm. Served by private wells.
Sure.
And so when you go to buy a home or you go to build a home, you need water.
Absolutely. You think.
And so you have to drill a well.
Yep.
And the role of the local health department is to ensure that the well's location is in a place that is least likely to be subjected to future contamination. So, on the regulatory side, before the well is drilled, we'll review a plan that the builder says, I want to put a well here. And we make sure we understand where the propane tank and the oil tank and where the septic system is going to go.
Okay.
We want to make sure that the wells are placed sufficiently far away from those possible sources of contamination.
Right.
So that if there's an oil leak or a propane leak, or if the septic system fails, or even if the septic system is functioning properly, we want to make sure that sewage isn't getting into the drinking water before it's had a good enough trip through the soil to become clean.
Yes.
So, on the regulatory side, that's what we do with new wells. We also make sure if there is contamination that's identified, we try to help homeowners identify the source of this contamination, and make recommendations for what they can do to remove contamination if it's in their well. So there are times, we recommend, the recommendation is to test your well every 5 years.
Sure.
Because things in the ground change over time. They're not static. I know what people stand on the ground and they think, okay, the ground is solid, nothing's changing here.
Right.
But bedrock shifts, cracks emerge, things get into water over time that weren't there when you first dug that well. So, if a homeowner tests their well and they find, I've got uranium, or I've got radon, or I've got arsenic in my well, it wasn't there before, we're there to help them understand what they can do to try to eliminate those health risks.
And uranium and that's some of the challenges in the Northeast, when you're dealing with the geology as far as that goes.
Unfortunately, the bedrock in particular, there are veins of bedrock running through eastern Connecticut in particular that are problematic from a uranium, radon, and arsenic perspective.
Nice.
So, in fact, just this year, just as of October 1st this year, new wells are required to be tested for uranium, arsenic, and lead.
And lead. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what about is iron and manganese another issue that can be prevalent?
They sure are, especially in this part of Connecticut.
Yes.
So anybody who drills a well in Portland or East Hampton or Colchester, if you don't find high levels of calcium, of iron, of manganese in your well, call yourself extremely fortunate.
Okay.
Because we find that in well water here all the time.
Wow.
Now, fortunately, those are mostly aesthetic issues, not potability issues. So if you've got a lot of iron in your water, it's just going to stain your fixtures and your toilet. And if you've got a real lot of iron, might have some problems with constipation. Am I allowed to say that on the show, Dave?
Sure, why not?
But it's not really a health issue. It's not going to cause any long-term health. But yes, that's in the water, and it's going to cause you problems, your fixtures and your lines and your pump.
Yeah.
So you're going to find that stuff. If you don't have it in your water now, you feel very fortunate.
Yeah, and typically, on the public water system side, a lot of times I'll get calls and say, "Geez, I have a white powder coming out of my hot water here. Particularly, it's calcium, correct?
Yeah,
and so forth. And what contributes to that? Obviously the hardness of the water, and so forth.
Whenever you hear somebody saying that they've got hard water, most of the time the component in the water that's making it hard is calcium.
Yeah.
Iron is another component of hard water, so is manganese. But calcium is where you're going to see those white deposits on the end of your fixtures and the end of your faucets. White, crusty. You can break it off with your fingers if you let it go long enough.
Sure. Now, what are some of the mitigation techniques that are available out there now?
Yeah, filtration.
Okay.
For hard water, you can get a pretty simple filtration that uses different salts to charge a media, and the media will draw the calcium and draw the iron out. Most of the time, if you look at your water system when it comes into your house, you'll see a couple of tanks. They'll look like big oxygen tanks or something sitting in, and that contains a certain media that will filter out the calcium and the iron from the water. Pretty cheap, because all you need to do is continue to put in these salt pellets, either I think potassium chloride or sodium chloride pellets in a big tank. And that creates a brine. And every night or every other night, your system will backwash that briny water through those filters, and it will recharge the media so that the media then can take out more iron and calcium. So it's pretty cheap, and pretty cheap to maintain. So that's often what you'll see people have.
A lot of times you hear for every action there's a reaction and so forth. So now in relation to homeowners that have wells and so forth that are on septic, is there potential something that happens in their septic system, with the brine?
Yeah, so it used to be many years ago that when you had these systems put in, the backwash, it's an effluent that has to go somewhere.
Yes.
Right? That people would put those backwash systems directly into their septic system, or they would put it in a pipe that just ran out underneath their deck, pump out onto the surface of the ground. That happened a lot. That's really no longer recommended. So if you have a new home that's being constructed, you don't want to put that backwash into your septic system, because septic systems are expensive to build and construct.
Sure.
And you have to maintain them. So the more stuff that's going, and that water that's coming out is going to be full of iron and calcium, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to be brown. It's going to be sedimenty. You don't want to put that into your septic system. You also don't want to put that on the surface of the ground, because it's going to make its way into surface waters, into wherever water runs off on your property. It makes its way into wetlands, and you don't want that salty, iron-filled water running off into any surface water. So nowadays, what we require people to do if they're going to have a system that filters out calcium, iron, manganese, and has a backwash, we have people put in what's called a water treatment wastewater system.
Okay.
So these are much more affordable, sort of tiny septic systems underground, where they'll have a pipe that'll go into it, and it just lets that water dissipate slowly into the soil.
Is that like a dry well, so to speak?
Yeah, people will call them dry wells.
Cistern or whatever.
Yeah, now we call them infiltrators or water treatment wastewater systems. But yes, they used to be called dry wells. All they are is a chamber that has little holes in it. And the water comes out into it, and the water slowly filters out through those holes into the soil.
And done.
Yep. That's it.
Now, as far as the systems that are out there, I mean, so obviously there are more elaborate systems that depending on the potential what you're treating for and so forth, and they can be expensive, as far as
they can. So the good thing is that there's a lot of new technologies out there for either water treatment or wastewater treatment. On the water treatment side, it's not just these cheap filter media that you can use, but you can get things like reverse osmosis systems that will filter out all kinds of contaminants, which is great. So if you've got uranium in your water, you can't use one of these basic media filter systems. You've got to use something like a reverse osmosis system, which can be very expensive and costly to maintain, uses actually a lot of water in the process of filtering the water out. On the septic side, there are people who have small lots of land, especially lots along lakes, and you might not have a lot of space. Old septic systems used to have these long stretches of gravel or concrete galleries. They would stretch for 200 feet across your property. Well, think about it. If you've got a lake lot that's only 4,000 square feet for the entire lot,
you got a problem.
You got a problem, right? You can't stretch a septic system the length of the property into your neighbor's property. So now they've got all these fancy
galleries, as they say.
Yeah, they're different technologies that have emerged that give you the same essential length of the septic system in a really small area.
Compact, yeah.
You know, they might look like woven fabric that runs in a coil almost, with special fabric, with special, gravel, treated gravel that goes in there. And that acts in a very small area as though it's filtering this water, this wastewater, over a much larger area.
Right.
So there are technologies we have available to make construction of properties in small lots in difficult soils much more manageable now.
Sure, and basically, when your sanitarians go out and do an inspection, obviously they look at the square footage of the house in relation to how many bathrooms, how many bedrooms, and so forth. And a lot of times, if some people go out and add on a bonus room or another bedroom and so forth, then that septic system has to be reevaluated.
That's exactly right. So whatever the septic system is built for.
Yeah.
Sometimes it'll be built for something that's 50% larger than what the house is. Like if you have a 3-bedroom house, sometimes the septic system will be sized even bigger.
Yep.
But most of the time that costs extra money people don't want to spend.
Right.
So when you go to add that bedroom or the bonus room, or you want to add a bathroom in your finished basement, for example, that adds to the strain on the system. That's more water that's going to be going into your septic system. And so that has to be evaluated. So whenever anybody's going to change either the use of their building or add on to a building, that has to go through a health department review, and our sanitarians will look at it and say, okay, a bathroom is expected to add 150 gallons of water usage per day, for example. And is this septic system from the tank to the leaching system where the water filters out and goes into the soil, is it capable of handling that?
Right.
If it's not capable of handling that, we don't necessarily say you can't do that because you got to put in a new septic system.
Right.
We don't even necessarily say you have to put in a new septic system. What we sometimes say to homeowners is, okay, the system isn't designed for this much water. It might be able to handle it.
Yeah.
So what we want you to show us is an area of your property where you could, if this system fails because you're overloading it,
you have room to expand.
Where you have room to expand.
Yes.
So we're reasonable in that sense. We don't say, sorry, you can't put on this bedroom, or you can't finish your basement or add this bathroom.
Right.
You have to put in another $25,000 worth of septic system on your property. We say, maybe it'll be able to handle it. Based on this review, just show us where, if this fails 5 years from now, where you're going to put the septic system.
I see. Now, for as far as the septic system and so forth, and you start doing that, obviously, if you're going to be putting in a septic system or even an in-ground irrigation system, that has to be taken into consideration on the leach field, correct?
Yeah, every bit of water that you're going to be using on that property, you have to know that the well is capable of supplying the water.
Okay.
First and foremost. And then you have to know that your wastewater handling system can handle that volume.
Right.
If it's irrigation, that's a little bit different.
Right.
So irrigation water is not going into your septic system. It's just going out onto your lawn, for example.
Well, and also depending on what your lot is zoned for. Okay. I mean, a lot of times you're required to adhere to certain setbacks and,
Absolutely. And those, for example, the irrigation systems, there's a water line, right, that is running through those. Those water lines cannot be within a certain distance of any source of pollution.
Sure.
That includes your septic system,
correct,
an underground oil tank, propane tank, any lines that feed that. So any part of the septic system, from the line that goes into the tank, from the tank, the line that goes into the leaching field, the leaching system itself. So you can't, for example, put an irrigation system with lines that run over your septic tank.
Right. That's a no-no.
That's a no-no. So you can't do that kind of thing. And you also need to make sure that your well is going to be able to handle that. So there's a lot that has to go through health department review.
Sure.
And people are going to be using their property when it comes to water they're taking out of the ground and water they're going to be putting back into the ground that's a wastewater.
Right. Now, as coming up before we went on air, we did our CWW annual conference yesterday, and one of the topics that was prevalent throughout the day, was PFAS and PFAS. Okay, so how does that impact private wells?
So right now, it's not required to test for PFAS.
Okay.
The only requirement, and I don't even know if it's a requirement, there is a recommendation now for large community public water systems to test for PFAS, but I don't even think it's a requirement. They're just recommending it.
They're recommending, yes.
PFAS are these group of chemicals, and there are many, I think thousands of varieties of PFAS chemicals.
They call them the forever chemicals.
They're called forever chemicals because they are incredibly difficult to remove.
Yes.
They can only be broken down at extremely high temperatures. They're really difficult to filter out. And even once you filter them out, to dispose of them
is another issue.
So you can filter them out of water. You can actually filter them out of water, I think, with granulated activated charcoal,
GAC,
right? Carbon, right? So you bring GAC filter, you can filter it out. But then what do you do with that GAC when it's time to rebed your filters? You got to do something with that.
Exactly.
It's full of PFAS.
Yeah.
So I think they only break down at temperatures over 5,000 degrees.
Yeah, it's extremely high.
Extremely high. I think there is one incinerator in the whole state of Connecticut that's capable of reaching temperatures that high.
Wow.
So it's not like you can take it to your transfer station and have them dispose of it. It's not going to happen. Unfortunately, those chemicals are ubiquitous. They are in cosmetics. They're in pizza boxes. They're in.
Oh my God!
When you get that,
your dryer sheets that you put in the dryer.
Your dryer sheets. Okay. They're on every one of your nonstick cooking surfaces.
Your umbrella fabric that you have stain resistant on your couch.
Stain resistant carpeting. I mean everything. What's the name of that stain resistance that they put on cars? It's a very famous name.
Armor All?
No, it's not Armor All. Anyway, if you have stain resistant carpet or upholstery in your cars or on your couches, it's got PFAS in it because the magic property of PFAS is they are extremely hydrophobic.
Yeah.
They will repel anything wet.
Yeah.
And it will not penetrate whatever you put that PFAS on.
Yeah.
Whether it's a carpet or upholstery or flooring or the Big Mac wrapper that you got in the drive-thru.
Sure.
You ever wonder why you can take that extremely thin wrapper, put it on your lap with your jeans and eat your Big Mac and not have your jeans covered in
grease?
PFAS. Magic chemicals, but they are forever chemicals. They're found in your body right now. If we were to test your blood, Dave, we would find PFAS in your blood.
Sure.
100% guarantee it.
One of the other issues, again, we talk about actions and reactions. One of the other issues that was brought up because of the PFAS yesterday was on the litigation side, of the harmful effects of PFAS, and are these manufacturers liable? If for some reason you get sick from PFAS and all that kind of stuff. They had a couple lawyers there and says, right now we're on uncharted waters.
Getting sick. So PFAS has been found, these chemicals have been found to be associated with certain types of cancers.
Yeah.
Having an association with a certain type of cancer, there's a big leap between finding out that you have, for example, bladder cancer, and connecting that particular case of bladder cancer to exposure to PFAS. On an individual level, Dave, that will never happen.
Right.
Where we see it happen are in industrial exposures. So people who work with PFAS chemicals, every day in high concentrations all the time. That's where we see these associations crop up, where you see clusters of cases of certain types of rare cancers in people who work with PFAS chemicals. So in those cases, there might be some liability issues. But on an individual level, if somebody says, well, I've been eating Big Macs my whole life and I got bladder cancer, it must be the PFAS. I'm sorry to tell you, Dave, you're really going to have a hard time finding
That's going to be a stretch.
That's going to be a stretch. I'm not saying you couldn't find a lawyer who's willing to take that case.
Yes.
But lawyers will take a lot of cases.
We're free.
Yeah. But they are of concern for health exposures long term. That's why there's a concern over water, because everybody drinks water.
Sure.
And when you find PFAS in large concentrations in water, you want to make sure you get it out of water, because the concern is not, I ate a Big Mac today, I'm going to get cancer from it. It's long term.
Yes.
Years and decades of exposure is where we see that risk. So we want to start being aware that it's in water.
Sure.
We want to start testing for it more often.
Yeah.
We want to start reducing our use of PFAS chemicals so it doesn't get into water.
Yeah.
But the problem right now is, I think there are only 3 laboratories in the state of Connecticut that can test for PFAS.
Yeah.
The tests are extremely expensive.
Yes.
You're hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for you as a homeowner if you're like, well, I'm worried about PFAS. I'm not telling you to go run out and test your well for PFAS.
Yeah.
It's expensive. The likelihood is, if you're living somewhere, you don't have PFAS in your well. But where we have seen PFAS in well are places where fires have been put out. for example. So one of the big uses of PFAS was in firefighting foam.
Yeah, AFFF.
AFFF.
Yeah.
That stuff was magic. You know why it was magic to put out fires? Because of the
clung to it.
Stop. They're fire resistant, fire retardant. They will quench that fire because they only break down at 5,000 degrees. Most fires that firefighters are putting out are not 5,000 degrees. So they're really great at putting fires out in foam. But if you lived near a factory that had a giant fire,
yes,
and it was a 5-alarm fire and they were spraying foam all over it, that's where you might want to be concerned that my well might have PFAS if your property is served by a well.
Yeah.
So if you think your property's at risk for having PFAS in the well, you might want to find out how much it costs to get that. And
sure,
there may be grants available to homeowners to get that done.
Right.
That's where the liability comes in. There have been some test cases. One is in New Hampshire, where the state of New Hampshire sued a manufacturer. It might have been 3M. I don't remember the exact case.
Okay.
But they were able to sue to get hundreds of millions of dollars from this manufacturer of PFAS because they were aware many years ago that PFAS, A, didn't break down, B, was a health concern,
right,
and they continued to use it.
Right.
So there's the liability in these large manufacturers or users of PFAS. So the state of New Hampshire was able to get a bunch of money from these manufacturers or users and put it into a grant program.
Sure.
Where wells that were found to have PFAS contamination could apply for funding to put in place treatment.
Sure.
The state of Connecticut has done nothing like this yet, but I can tell you that the state of Connecticut is looking for opportunities to find large users or manufacturers of PFAS liable for contamination in groundwater. So that may be coming because there's already been a test case in a state nearby that's been successful.
Well, in fact, one of the speakers that we had yesterday was from New Jersey. And it's funny that you mentioned fires because they tested their water system and they had, one section of town, that was showed up with PFAS, and they had another section that didn't. And one of the kind of attributing factors, there were two large fires, and one was back in the 1970s, and one was fairly recently. And the one that was back in the 1970s, the homes surrounding that fire, that's where the PFAS was showing up. Versus, so I think, now fire departments are now using more an environmentally friendly, a green, fire suppressant as far as that goes. So, but that was interesting to see. And we had an issue here in Connecticut, with the plane that caught fire at Bradley
Correct.
Field that did, the Farmington River got affected.
That's right. And they sent out a bunch of, I think they warned people not to eat any fish they pulled out of the river. They warned people with wells along that area that might be concerned. I think that ended up being abated pretty quickly because they were aware of what the risks were.
Sure.
So they moved pretty quickly. We actually had an issue in East Hampton a number of years ago. There was a fire at the Bevan Bell factory.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
And they used a pretty large quantity of AFFF there.
Uh-huh.
So pretty recently, the State Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and the State Department of Public Health partnered with Chatham Health District to do a study of well water in that area.
Uh-huh.
That included a public water system that was run by the town of East Hampton. I want to say it was either the Village Center system, but also a number of homes, and they found PFAS in a number of those wells.
Okay.
So, the good news is that big public water system, the amount of PFAS that was there was very small.
Uh-huh.
It was in the pre-treatment sample that they found the PFAS, and the existing treatment on that system, they were using GAC.
Yeah.
And they found that they were already on the use side and the distribution side, there was no PFAS.
Nice.
So I think they got lucky that it was a small quantity of PFAS. The concentrations were low, still above what the action levels are.
Yeah.
But the treatment system that was already in place was effectively removing the PFAS from the drinking water side. So I think they were fortunate.
Yeah.
But it's good to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was just an example very locally of there was a fire, they used AFFF.
Yeah.
There was a study that was done, they found PFAS, now the treatment was working.
Oh, it's funny how these contaminants work. I think PFAS is now taken the place of asbestos. Remember back in the day we had asbestos and we had, transite pipe, asbestos water mains and all that kind of stuff. And that now it's become, that's,
and that was DuPont, wasn't it?
Yeah,
DuPont was the big one. Everybody wanted to point the finger at DuPont for contaminated.
Exactly. And, I've been in the water industry for, almost 50 years. And the thing is that that was supposed to be the best thing since sliced bread, transite pipe. It's lighter, it's stronger, it's thicker, yada, yada.
Great
yada.
stuff.
Yeah. Try to cut it with a saw, and, we're using a cutoff saw, and, the dust is in our face. Yeah, we never wore masks back then, as far as that goes.
And again, that's another example of, the industrial exposure. And that's where we first started seeing issues with exposure to asbestos, was the industrial exposure.
Sure.
People cutting pipe, people laying insulation, things like that.
Yep.
Those are the folks who were getting sick. And there's always a chance that there's something else out there we're using right now and we have no idea.
It hasn't been found yet.
I mean, when you think about Teflon, it's like, wow, Teflon is the greatest stuff. You ever try to fry an egg on like a stainless steel cooking pan?
Oh, yeah.
It's a nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody wants to fry an egg on a stainless steel cooking pan. It's awful. Fry an egg on a pan that's got Teflon on it, right?
Nonstick.
Well, you might want to think about transitioning away from that Teflon. In fact, I don't think Teflon's being used anymore now.
Yeah, on that. That's okay. So anyway, hey, this podcast, again, when I implemented this podcast, Russ, is obviously the careers that you didn't know about. And so, going back to your school days, and how did you formulate your career path as far as that goes?
Oh, gosh, Dave, your listeners aren't going to like this. I literally stumbled into a career in public health.
Okay.
So I actually didn't take the traditional route into becoming a health director. I was working for the American Red Cross doing transfusion transmissible disease research for them. Then I realized I was doing public health there with the population of concern being blood donors and blood recipients. And I went on to get my master's degree in public health, got exposed to the field of epidemiology, realized I was already doing epidemiology, and then went on to be an epidemiologist at a local health department. And now I'm running a different local health department than the one I started with. But most health directors in the state of Connecticut, they start their careers off as sanitarians.
Okay.
These are environmental health professionals. If you want to be a director of health in the state of Connecticut, the quickest and easiest path for you is to become an environmental health specialist, a sanitarian, somebody that works with septic systems, somebody that works with water, with wells, somebody that works inspecting restaurants, the other things sanitarians do, and then get a master's degree in public health. You'll become a health director sooner or later.
Sure.
So that's how I stumbled into it. I was doing research at a college for the Red Cross, and I just sort of realized that my interests were in population health.
Now, obviously, to become a sanitarian from an educational requirement standpoint, is it more certification? How does that work?
So to become a registered sanitarian, you have to have a 4-year college degree at this point.
Okay.
You can start off doing environmental health work without that degree.
Okay, working under somebody possibly?
Yeah, working under somebody, doing things like, salon and cosmetology inspections, doing housing code enforcement. So a lot of people will start off doing that stuff.
Okay.
But to become a food service, you have to, in order to be certified in food service inspection, in subsurface sewage disposal, in lead risk assessment.
Right.
You have to get that 4-year college degree.
I see.
It doesn't have to be in anything particular. You could get a 4-year college degree in sociology if you want.
Sure.
Then it's mostly about training and certification. And we do all that at the local health department level. We've taken people who have no experience at all. We put them under the wings of an experienced sanitarian. We train them. Right now, the state of Connecticut, the Southern Connecticut State University, has an environmental health training program. So for listeners who are wondering, how can I get this career jump-started? Looking at that environmental health training program at Southern, which has everything you need. They'll train you in the basics of food service inspection. They'll train you in the subsurface sewage disposal in wells. You can do that over the course of 16 weeks, I believe, in the evenings. If you've got a 4-year college degree and you get that in an environmental training program, you'll get hired tomorrow by a local health department.
Sure. You could have a 4-year degree in basket weaving.
You could have a 4-year. It doesn't matter. If you've got any kind of 4-year degree and you get that environmental training program certification,
you're in.
I will hire you.
Awesome. Okay. Okay, listeners, you heard that live from the horse's mouth.
And you will make a really good salary. I mean, you want to talk about salaries. We've got people who started with that 4-year degree who are now making over $60,000 a year 2 years later.
Nice.
So, the benefits are good. The hours are good. Our employees, for example, if they're on
flexible hours,
35 hours a week, you get vacation, you get paid sick time.
You get benefits.
You get a 10% pension on top of whatever you put into your retirement. So, we give you really good benefits.
Nice.
It's a great place to work. It's a great job to do, and it's really important.
So advice to high school seniors or, college freshmen that are, just finding their way into their career path. What would you say?
I'd say, take a couple, if you have the opportunity to take any elective courses when you're in college, take something in environmental health, take something in, hydrology or mineralogy or forestry. I mean, all those things become important when you're a sanitarian, or a general environmental health class, just to see, because the world of environmental health isn't just being a sanitarian, but that's something that can get you exposed to those things.
Right.
Because in the end, like I said, it doesn't really matter what your 4-year degree is in.
Yep. You
can get a career as a sanitarian, no matter what that for. But take some classes to see if you're interested. Reach out to your local health department. Find out if they've got an internship program.
Right.
Right now, the state of Connecticut is looking to get tens of $millions in workforce development specifically for public health.
Yep.
So local health departments and the state health department pretty soon, I think, are going to be coming into some money to have these training and internship programs where you might even get paid to be an intern and learn on the job.
Sure.
So,
well, my town tech program that I've been teaching since 1991, actually, one of your old retired employees, Don Mitchell, worked with me for many, many years, and work, going out and doing a lot of environmental work and do soil sampling. And we used to go out to the cranberry bogs, and we used to do macroinvertebrate sampling and all that kind of stuff. But Don has been around for many years. I think he's retired now completely, isn't he?
Yeah, he's technically retired. He does per diem work for the town of Essex now.
Oh,
so
okay.
He couldn't just walk away.
Yeah.
But speaking of all that water sampling, that's the other thing that sanitarians do. We do environmental investigations of all kinds: pollution, contamination in our streams, in our lakes, in our rivers. We do a lot of sampling of bathing water. Lake Pocatapog. We take weekly samples. We do investigations of blue-green algae blooms that can
invasive species,
things related to climate change that we weren't seeing before that we're seeing now. So, water isn't just well water and septic, it's surface water. It's our lakes, ponds, streams, rivers, oceans.
Now, what's kind of inhabiting the river now? Fragilia, the invasive species that's found in the river now.
I'm not going to be able to. I don't know the name, but what we see in our lakes also right now is like milfoil. That's a really big one, milfoil. So before you take your boat into a lot of lakes, you might have to stop and get an inspection.
Sure.
To look at the bottom of your boat to make sure you don't have anything weird on there. Because people take boats all over the place. They leave stuff on. My recommendation to you, if you have a boat, clean your boat off really thoroughly when you take it out of the water.
Yeah.
And certainly before you bring it into the next body of water.
Sure.
Because that's how invasive species spread.
Well, I think one of the water utility, Aquarion, has a lot of water bodies that they utilize for recreation, and they don't allow outside boats to come in, or if they do, they're inspected.
Yep.
They make sure that they're bleached down and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Go from there. So, well, great. All right, Russ, thanks so much for coming. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to be here, Dave.
And we're going to do more, and I think Ryan is going to be doing another podcast shortly, and we'll probably be getting the call for the Town of Portland podcast. So anyway, all right, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this episode of our Future of the Water and Wastewater Industry and the careers you didn't know about with our health director from the Chatham Health District, Mr. Russ Melmed. So Russ was in the house. If you have any questions, or if would you like to go to work for the Chatham Health District, you heard what he said. Give him a call, drop him a dime, and we'll see you soon. Thanks so much. I'm your host, Dave Kosminski.